I've got some questions about mortgage prisoners.
Yes.
Your interim report discusses how you can help mortgage prisoners, and there are proposed solutions for those who've got mortgages with an active lender, but not a great deal of information on what happens with inactive lenders. And also the report notes that the FCA will begin discussions on possible solutions for these customers. What are those possible solutions, and have the discussions started?
These for inactives?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge we have with inactives is that it's another of these regulatory perimeter issues that the mortgages can be held by people who are outside the perimeter in that sense. We have had, over recent times, discussions with a number of inactive lenders about their policies. And we are also having, and I think we will have to have further discussions with government about what do we do about this, because we are at a perimeter issue again. But I can assure you that what we want to do is end up with essentially the same, if we can get to the same solution for inactive lenders, because I don't think it is, frankly fair that, by no choice of their own, people find that their mortgage has been transferred to an inactive, or a party has become inactive, or it's been transferred to an inactive lender, and they're then put in a difficult position. And I think you're sort of getting at another important point. Of course, there is a higher probability that will be the case, particularly if people are with a slightly marginal mortgage lender who then gets into trouble and it becomes inactive for one reason or another. So, you have my sort of commitment that we will look for every way we can to try and solve this issue.
So what's the time scale? Because if you're put in that position as a mortgage, we all know, if we have mortgages, how tough that is to make.
I don't know at the moment. Well, I'd be happy to come back to you on that and see what we could.
Could you give us some idea? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? I mean, how are people meant to plan ahead their finances if they're paying potentially hundreds of pounds more per month for their mortgage? Is that something that those people are getting advice on? Is anyone giving them advice on that? Because at the moment, they're in limbo land.
Yeah. Can I come back to you on that one?
Sure.
Because I think there may be a number of potential angles we come at that from, because as you say, one is advice, the other is, frankly, having a code of conduct amongst the inactive mortgage lenders to assist in this. The third one is an issue that we've encountered before, which there is a curiosity in the EU Mortgage Credit Directive.
In the interpretation of it, or?
Well,
are we interpreting? Is the UK interpreting it correctly?
Well, so
are there examples in other countries where it's not being interpreted in the same way?
I should say both we and the Treasury have been around this question several times, because the point gets made: are you over-interpreting it?
Yeah.
And we've not managed to sort of get ourselves into a position where we think we are. The challenge you have at the moment is, and it is really bonkers, which is that if you can remortgage with an active lender. So if you're with an active lender, you can remortgage with your existing lender.
Yeah.
And even though you fail the test of affordability with a new mortgage, by definition, you're only going to remortgage if it's better than your previous mortgage. So it must be beneficial to you.
Yeah.
All the advice we've had, and Treasury have had as well, is that if you're trying to remortgage with another party, you run into this trap. Now, this is just silly.
Yeah, it's completely illogical.
And we've been around a number of times, but I'm happy to come back and say, look, we could do the following things, and I'll probably have to get the Treasury.
Okay, but I think there is a great urgency. So I have constituents who are in this position,
right?
As I'm sure others do. You mentioned you've had discussions with the government. Have you considered, have you made an ask about legislative changes or by statutory instruments if necessary to clear this up quickly? And have you also discussed potentially identifying whether there's a need for resources to insulate people against being trapped in a situation where they accumulate mortgages that they can't afford, or they end up in debt from elsewhere, to be able to keep the mortgage going? And my third question is, it's partly related to this point about what to do to protect people, but also, has anyone done any assessment of how many of those, it's 30,000 people who might be at risk of having their homes repossessed because of this issue? And then there's, of course, another 120,000 that's referred to in the report, I think. Would you be able to shed some light on those questions?
Well, I think one thing that another way to maybe get at this question is to say, introduce or get the cooperation of the inactive lenders to introduce a code or standard for their own behaviour, which would effectively not require legislation but would get them to commit to...
How many have committed to it?
Well, we haven't got it at the moment.
Sorry, but when are we going to get it, and how many do you expect to commit to this? It's just that there just doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency. I recognise that you've done a lot of work on the interim report, but I mean, I know if I was in a situation like that, where my mortgage was a few £100s more per month, I'd struggle, and I earn, a very high salary as a Member of Parliament. So even for those who are in good incomes, this will be a struggle. So how are people meant to handle the situation? And it's not a small number of people, it's 30,000 people, plus the 120,000 that's referred to, who referred to in the Money Saving Experts article, likely other consumers with mortgages that have been sold to firms not authorised for lending, also face barriers to switching. I don't know if there's any work that's been done on that.
Well, I'm not aware of it, but I'll let you know, because the point they make is the relevant one. It's outside our perimeter at that point.
Yeah.
But we do, as we said, through the work we've done, we have some view of the total size of the market. We don't have as good a view of the individual firms, though, unfortunately. But let me take that away, and I'll come back to you if you don't mind.
And what about in your discussions with the Treasury? Have you explored the possibility of legislation if you don't get the cooperation, the voluntary sign-up by those who are not active lenders?
Well, here's one of the frustrations that...
And have you asked them for money to identify, as we have done on welfare policies to mitigate the worst effects, the hardship fund, for instance? Is there a fund that should be created so that people don't end up having their homes repossessed?
Well, can I just go back to the discussion with the Treasury, because here's one of the frustrations, if you don't mind me saying so, of the Brexit vote, because up until the point where the referendum happened, we were reasonably optimistic that we could probably get a change in the EU to this regulation.
Sure.
Which would have allowed us to get at the issue. That's become very difficult in the post-referendum world, because if it's a UK-specific thing.
But it's been a while since the referendum, hasn't it?
No, but my point is this: it's not so much it's the elapsed time; it's it's straightforward. It's the negotiating.
I know.
It's what leverage do we have in the system? That's the challenge.
Sure, I suppose. It's been a while, so given that's not. We no longer have enough influence to be able to influence. Yes, what's Plan B while people wait?
Yeah. And as you know, the second thing, which is not easy at the moment, would be to say, it's not on actually, which is, couldn't you introduce something into the the exit loan?
Well, I was just going to ask, obviously the debate we're having at the moment on this bill, perhaps not a debate today, but about retained EU law, is this one of the areas where you would be suggesting to the Treasury this is something we could change to do what we want to do?
So this introduces a much bigger point. So the rules of engagement on that at the moment are, we've all got a list of, top 10 EU bits of EU legislation we'd love to change. This would be in my top 10. But the rule of engagement with you Parliament is we don't do this because it's strictly it's strict onshoring, and the only changes we make are what we call inoperables, i.e. it won't work in the UK in the UK legislative framework if you don't do something. It's not strictly not. We've always had this list of things we'd like to change, and now's the moment. I think, however, your point is right, which is, okay, but going forwards, what do we do about that? However, it doesn't solve the timing issue.
Can I just ask one final question, which is, how have other EU countries dealt with this situation? Have they not, do they not have any comparable challenges
I've
like
not
this
come
one?
across, but, and I don't think the Treasury have either, a comparable issue that we've
where people might be
found,
trapped in mortgage.
we usually try to do this because we're usually looking for allies. And I don't think we've found...
So there isn't an equivalent of mortgage
I'm
prisoners
not aware
in
of it,
other EU countries?
I'll talk to the Treasury as well about
It's just that if we're trying to influence this at EU level, the first question, one of the key questions would be to understand who else is in a similar boat.
Where our allies is always the first question, yes.
Yeah, but we don't know the answer to that.
Well,
I'm just wondering whether it's because it's a non-issue for other countries because their mortgage system is different, or it's that we just don't know because we haven't asked the question.
Put it this way, it's not an issue that I've ever heard being raised by other countries. Now, it doesn't mean to say it's not there. I couldn't tell you that definitively, but it's not something that I've certainly come across. But I'll come back to you, and I do agree with you that one way or another we've got to find a way through this. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Stuart.
Thank you. Andrew, in March you published new rules on defined benefit pension transfers.